off and then back to Colorado again. Local laborers generally work 12-hour shifts as well, and men coming off their ships are exhausted. They complain of severe headaches and have other complaints matching some of what I mentioned earlier. Now, for a long time, we believed what the developers were telling us, that drilling muds are benign, that they are safe, until we got an urgent request to see if we had any information about 40 products used in Wyoming during drilling. There had been a serious blowout during a routine drilling operation in Wyoming, and this was a new well where the drillers got to a depth of 8,000 feet and something went wrong with the casing near the surface. And at an extremely high pressure, the well began to blow out. There were 2 major cracks at the surface from which the muds and gases flew up into the air, and ooze came out of the road cuts and ran down the county road. It took 57 hours to get under control. Now, this was adjacent to a housing development, and it was not surprising to hear that the people living in the area had to be evacuated using respirators and stay away from their homes for days because of the noxious fumes. This graph shows what we were able to learn about the chemicals spilled when a fracking mixing chemical truck was involved in an accident in Garfield County, Colorado, on one of those narrow 2-lane county roads. The truck heading to a fracking operation spilled 318 gallons of material that contained 4 products. According to the MSDS sheets, there were 15 different chemicals involved. Here you can see how they fell out by health category. The column on the farthest left in this case covers ecological effects. They all would have had an effect on the environment in some way or another, like the fish, invertebrates, and plants. And here you see the profile for the volatiles, and here you see the profiles for the water-soluble chemicals. All 4 were associated with all the health categories we show here. We were sent the test results from 6 New Mexico evaporation pits that are scheduled to be shut down in the near future. The health effects of the 51 chemicals and metals that were detected produced a health pattern even more hazardous than the patterns of the chemicals found in our spreadsheets for the state of New Mexico. In addition, some of the chemicals were found at extremely high concentrations, well above New Mexico and federal safety levels. But only 8 chemicals detected in the pits matched the chemicals used in New Mexico. Upon looking at the chemical testing protocols used in the New Mexico pit study, we found that except for naphthalene, they did not test for the other chemicals that we have on our list that are being used in New Mexico. And we found that over 90% of the chemicals reported in the pits are on the CERCLA, or the Superfund list of toxic chemicals. The Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation and Liability Act of 2005, and the EPCRA, Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know Act, and the EPCRA List of Lists of 2006, which raises questions about how they got into the pits. Now keep in mind that of all the products on our list for all states, we know nothing about the composition for almost 40% of them, and only know the full composition for a little more than 10% of them. Now let's get away from the pits and go back up into the mountains for a minute. It is a rare day in the West anymore when we can take a picture without a blue haze destroying the vistas. Here you see the high country where gas development is encroaching on our beautiful forests and mountain meadows and in a major western watershed. Recently, scientists at NOAA reported wintertime ozone in the Wyoming, Jonah, Pinedale, anticline gas fields rising to more than 140 parts per billion. 2 years ago, Pinedale and the Jackson Hole area hit 155 parts per billion. At that time, they had to shut down the ski areas and actually close the schools and not let children go outside in that area. That was twice, more than twice, the compliance level that EPA has established for ozone, which is 75 parts per billion. And even at 75 parts per billion, EPA scientists admit that any increment in parts per billion above 40 parts per billion, you can begin to see measurable health effects among our children, among the newborn, and among the aged. Our Rocky Mountain forests lie right in the path of the air pollutants from gas and oil development to the west and could easily be caught in an ozone plume. Ozone plumes can extend over 200 miles. Like the alveoli in our lungs, the stomata in leaves on deciduous trees and needles on conifers suffer ozone burn. This leads to reduced growth rates, increased susceptibility to disease, and early death, have all been blamed on ozone in evergreen forests, commercial tree species to fruit trees, food and forage crops, hay and alfalfa, starting at 50 parts per billion. These recent readings were more than double that. The trees in our mountain forests in the west are the keepers of our water. They make it possible for us to have water year-round. Not only does ozone pose a direct threat to human health, it also poses a covert threat to our already marginal freshwater supply in the west by weakening the trees. But we know now that wherever natural gas operations are going to commence or increase, air pollution must be treated as seriously as water pollution. Downwind effects on agriculture and those living in rural areas must now be taken into consideration. We need to know a lot more. Products must be labeled with a complete formulation along with the quantity or concentration of every chemical used in the product. And most important, identification of the fluids that are used to fill the product containers to the brim. The source and quality of all water used to fracture must be accounted for, as well as the formulation or how much of each product is used in the fracking fluids. Dangerous chemicals are being mixed in large quantities in the gas fields by people who have no idea what they are using. Even the bosses have no idea what is being used. Yet they will stand by the company's mantra that the chemicals are safe. The amount of fluids injected and recovered during fracking should be public information. Data should be made public about the chemical composition of what is in pits, on the well pads, and also in the offside waste disposal areas. From a life support system perspective in the West, we better find out how much of the water being taken from the Colorado River drainage basin to produce natural gas is being returned to the Colorado River system. Will this affect the Colorado River Compact commitments to the states downstream? This applies to all river drainages across the country, even in areas of high precipitation as in the east. As the size and intensity of natural gas extraction increased over the past decade, so have the numbers and the amounts of chemicals increased, putting air and water, resources, and more people at risk. And from a public health perspective, the time has come for full disclosure. Realistic, comprehensive water monitoring programs must be set up that include numerous downslope sites, miles away, at outcroppings, watering holes, springs, creeks, and domestic wells where chemicals injected underground might eventually surface. Although it is too late already in some areas, baseline monitoring of water quality and ozone should commence immediately in all other areas where activity is going to start. No matter where the activity is taking place geographically, someone should be charged with quantifying both agricultural and drinking water depletion, and especially in light of climate change. Now, our information reveals not only immediate but chronic and latent hazards are posed to human and wildlife health from chemical contaminants being introduced in our watersheds, but also an emerging threat to our air that will not go away until the gas fields shut down and the stationary and mobile sources associated with processing and delivering gas are no longer in operation. This generally is not discussed when the impacts of gas production are under consideration. We must think in terms of prevention. Thank you for listening. Without the support of these organizations and people, we would not have been able to bring you this presentation. And for the list of chemicals being used, go to TEDx's website, www.endocrinedisruption.org, and look at our natural gas program. We will be updating it regularly, and you can learn more about fracking fluids there. And most important, while you are at our site, go to the Endocrine Disruption Program and look at the fossil fuel connection. It will give you more reason to seek other, more sustainable sources of energy than fossil fuels.